All right, so we're recording, and I'm going to get this onto the Facebook here. And go live. Okay, so welcome everybody to this great event we have planned for National Prevention Week. I have been looking forward to this for quite a while. I know people are going to start to hop on here in a second, but I'm so happy to be able to introduce our special guest today, David Goldenkranz.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, and so it's National Prevention Week, and I'm always looking for interesting things to do that are a little bit different than just posting, things that tell people why drugs are bad and don't do drugs. I mean, I don't post like bad stuff, but always looking for interesting things to do, interesting people to talk to, for sure. And I stumbled upon David because I just thought, hey, I'm going to go on YouTube and just type in videos about marijuana and see what comes up. Maybe I'll find like a cool documentary or something. And lo and behold, I found yours. And so right after I found it, I decided to contact you, and you were so gracious to speak with me a little bit. And here we are. So you and I have never met. We've talked on the phone a couple of times. So I just want to welcome you here and thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
No, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate that.
So in the spirit of Prevention Week, today is the day when we talk about marijuana prevention. And different coalitions around the country are doing this a little bit differently. We're seeing a lot of hashtag posts and NPW 2020 and all of this stuff. And I can guarantee that nobody else has booked you to do an interview today. I am super psyched that I got you. So I have some questions I want to ask you about your documentary. I really, really enjoyed it. And I feel like storytelling is such a great way to teach people and to reach people. Looking back, what inspired you to make your documentary?
Yeah, so I actually made the documentary in 2010. It was my senior year of college, and I had just gotten sober, I believe it was that year. And I think, honestly, one of the biggest hurdles that I was facing was that people, I think you get a lot of accolades as far as when it comes to harder drugs or alcohol in the recovery community. But I felt like even within meetings, and there were sometimes certain settings where people were just kind of shrugging off this marijuana thing. It just wasn't really on their radar as like a problem. So, and then as far as the general population, that was a joke to begin with. People literally would just kind of sometimes laugh at me outright if I told them that I, didn't smoke because it was a problem, or I couldn't stop or whatever. They were like, it's not addictive, So I just to be honest, I think I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I think I had a bit of a vendetta. I was just kind of like, this is not fair. Like this, I'm working so hard to not use the substance again, and I can't even get the support of even members of my own family. We're just like, oh, this isn't, you know, congrats on stopping, I guess. You know, it's just like, I was just finding it very hard to prove to people that it was something that was not only a struggle for me, but that I was seeing it affect my friends' lives and other people in my family as well. That I kind of felt like I needed to just get that message out there, which then led to the title, actually, from talking to somebody else who, he kind of was like a consultant for me on the film, was like, you know, it's almost like it's treated like a second-class citizen. You know, it's like, oh yeah, it's like this second-class addiction. It's not taken seriously, and it doesn't get the same, you know, respect or like rights, if you will. Yeah, so I think it really just kind of motivated me to create something that could just help show what that struggle was like. Yeah, and truth be told, I actually had no intent of being in the film. It was supposed to be kind of an objective piece, but I had an advisor on that film who was like, it's a personal story, you need to be in it. And so had to step on the other side of the camera, and that was not something I was necessarily comfortable with or had planned on doing, but I think it ultimately added to the story, and like you said, has made it into more of a story than kind of just an info session.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding more and more in the health education world, it's really stories that people respond to more. And like, you know, I always prefer hearing about, you know, human interest stories. At the same time, you don't want to exploit people's experience either. So I thought you did an excellent job in navigating how to talk about it. I was just blown away.
Thank you.
So there's so many opinions and perceptions about drugs and addiction, right? So stigma and what's the best way to get into recovery or whatever. There's so many different things that people talk about. After you made your documentary, what was the initial feedback you got after you released it? And did anything surprise you?
So, truth be told, the biggest showing of it was actually at my college in a full-size theater, surrounded by peers who had also done senior thesis, but also all professors from all over the college. So I was having people stop me, you know, in the hallways, telling me like, that was powerful. Like, thank you for making that, or that was brave of you to tell that story. I was initially kind of cringing because it was like, I invited a few people to watch it, but it was like, it was a very vulnerable experience, both creating it and then showing it and seeing that I was just kind of bearing my entire story for people who, you know, barely knew me. To be honest, there wasn't a huge reaction to it when I initially created it, though, because after that, I didn't have much traction on it. It wasn't until I ended up posting it for free on YouTube, because I was like, well, I'd rather the intent was never to monetize it. So the whole point is to get the message out there. And I forgot I had posted it, and all of a sudden, you know, just started seeing all these little flips coming up in the, you know, social media, like, subscribe, all this stuff, which I was not very proficient at that time with what I was doing there. And it stirred up quite a bit of controversy, like very quickly. People were connecting it to their blogs, putting it on websites. Like, I had some people reaching out to me asking about like, how are you doing? Are you still sober? Can you help me? Like, what do you recommend? But I had a lot of other people, in fact, way more people, who just vehemently needed to like explain to me why it wasn't addictive, or that, oh, I've been smoking for 20 years and I can stop anytime I want, or I stopped for 2 months and I had no problem. And I had to kind of bite my tongue, because there was times where I just wanted to react and be like, okay, well, yeah, great. But it just seemed like a lot of the reactions, to be honest, were, it felt like there was a lot of people who thought it was propaganda. There were people that convinced that I got funding from the government to make it. So go figure, a bunch of potheads who were watching a video. Like, I mean, to be honest, kind of get it. Like, I've been in that paranoid conspiracy theory realm as well. I smoked a lot of weed. So, but yeah, I think it was a huge mixed reaction. But truth be told, I would say that the majority of people that have, even to this date, commented on it or given me any feedback on it, of all the views, it's a lot of people who are very defensive. And to me, it's like, and to me, it's like they're more having a battle with themselves than with me. Like, they have something to prove to themselves, and they just take it out on me. And unfortunately, other people will oftentimes jump into the conversation And I'm like, no, don't do that, because then of course you see all these things go down the thread now attacking that person who spoke up saying, well, I had the same problem. And I always, I try to respond to those people, if they're reaching out or showing that they've really had that vulnerability. But it just sucks that there's all these other people that are willing to like just lash out at them too, and being like, well, you're just, a wimp as well. I'm using a very nice word there. It's not, wimp is not what I'm being called.
And I think the name of your documentary kind of says it all, second class addiction, but I don't think we see this with any other drug or substance. Like, people don't question whether or not something is addictive. People say, oh, I have a problem with alcohol. People are like, I know somebody, or, whatever it is. Like, it's bizarre to me,
And I've said to people before, like, a slot machine is a piece of plastic, metal, and glass, and some, but people have lost their houses, they've lost their families, they've lost their homes. Like, gambling is not even a substance, and people get incredibly addicted to that as a behavior. So why do we keep debating whether the substance is addictive or not? That doesn't matter. That's beside the point. And I feel like I tried to communicate that in the documentary, but for a lot of people, they watch the first 20 minutes of it and they just assume that I'm trying to argue that this is a bad substance, and that's not even the case I'm trying to make in the film, which is just raising awareness around, doesn't matter what the substance or the behavior is. You can get addicted to it, period.
Yeah, it's certainly a very brave thing, because, in prevention, I get the same thing. I get people coming to me saying, you shouldn't even be talking about marijuana. You should be talking more about prescription drugs and heroin. Like, why are you wasting your time with talking about marijuana? Or, you should be talking about alcohol. Alcohol is what really hurts people. Marijuana never hurt anybody. It just makes people giggle and eat, like, and I hear it all the time. And certainly in my field, in prevention, we are constantly on the defense, constantly. And, we've got people battling us that have a lot of money and a lot of influence. And, when we, try to talk about the facts about, the percentage of people who use marijuana can become dependent on it. And this is what dependency feels like. And this is what the withdrawals might feel like. Half the time we're not taken seriously. It's going to take time. And it's going to take brave people like you to say, hey, look, this is something that I struggled with, and this is what helped. Now, more of a fun question. I love when people bring in experts, because I think you brought in some experts in your video that really nailed it. They really had good perspective. And then you had people who, spoke against that point of view as well. But who would you have liked to have interviewed, just for, S's and G's? Who would you have liked to have talked about? Alive, dead, famous? Like, who would you have liked to get some perspective from? If money was no issue, time was no issue, history was no issue, who would you like to talk to about marijuana?
Money, time, and history then we can go. Would it be fun to resurrect Hendrix to have that conversation? Sure. But I don't know. I was actually thinking about this one. I think it's somebody that just came to mind, and it may be over the top and a little cliche, but I think former President Barack Obama would be an interesting person.
Yeah.
In part just because that video surfaced of him smoking, and I think that his response was always so muted to it that it sort of like went away. I think that when it got launched, it was like designed to like sabotage him, and he just did a really good job kind of like, anyways, back on to more important things. I think part of the reason I would want to influence him though, interview him, is because I see him as such an influencer in terms of, and you have so many young followers and still people who look to him and kind of idolize him as this person who, is a relic of better times, maybe, if you will, not to politicize this, but I just think that I would be curious kind of what his perspective is on it, as somebody who, sees addiction, obviously looks at he had clearly seen, numbers in terms of how this was affecting the population, how it was affecting, productivity, work, inpatient. Just like there was clearly some awareness within the White House staff on how addiction affects the country, period. So yeah, I would just be kind of curious on, what his take would be on the legality aspects of it, and especially now that he's no longer president, like where he stands on that in terms of decriminalization, legalization, people getting help for it. And again, I think having somebody who's kind of a big influencer in that realm would be potentially, people aren't going to, people don't listen to somebody like me who's just going to go out on a limb and make this documentary. But I feel like if somebody like him, and granted I'm putting words in his mouth, was able to say, like, look, this substance works for some people, it doesn't for others. Like, we've seen problems with it. It clearly is, having an effect on our nation, and it's caused quite a big debate. People might listen.
Right.
Again, money and time and history being no issue, he would be somebody I would potentially interview on the subject.
Yeah, totally. That's good. A little Hendrix just for, its little creative aspect, and then somebody who could talk about anything really, with a good delivery. I have to say, I'll tell you this. I don't know if you've seen the carpool karaoke, and now it's like carpool interviews. I don't know if you've ever seen any of these, where two celebrities will drive around. James Corden, he used to drive around with like a singer or an artist, and they used to both sing karaoke to that artist's music. Anyway, talk about marijuana and culture and norms and popular culture. Matthew McConaughey and Snoop Dogg did like a carpool karaoke type deal the other day. And in the snippet that I saw, Matthew McConaughey was talking about his famous all right, all right, all right, and what he thought about to get into character and stuff. And he's sitting with Snoop Dogg, right? So, obviously two people who I would imagine are users. And they just had like a good laugh over it, kind of. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so iconic. And I'm like, here I am, like a fan of the movie. I've listened to Snoop Dogg since I was about 9. Love Matthew McConaughey. I have a lot of respect for their bodies of work, but as a prevention person, I'm like, oh, like, here we are, like glorifying drug use and like, la 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 la. So I'm like so conflicted, when I hear that stuff. But I thought it was so funny. That's a great movie. Anyway, moving on. So this is a little bit more of a serious question. So a lot of the stuff that I do in prevention is, obviously working with youth and talking to them about the facts about drugs, but I'm also targeting parents, right? So encouraging parents to have important conversations with their kids about, drug use and, what their expectations are. Is there anything that you wish that you knew as a kid about marijuana, like something that, a message you would have heard or from a certain person or a delivery, or do you think you would have not been receptive to it?
It's funny. I was actually having a conversation with my dad the other day on a run kind of about this. I think one thing that, I don't know how you would frame it to a kid, but basically to explain to a child that people use drugs, marijuana included, because they're fun. Like, obviously there's the long-term aspect of like a lot of people then use it because it's a coping mechanism. But the initial impulse and the inclination is like, it's an experience. It's going to feel good. Mm-hmm. I think that I definitely grew up kind of in the DARE era and not to say negative things about DARE now. I know it's evolved as an organization, but this was back when it was still, just post Reaganomics as far as like drugs are bad, don't do them. Mm-hmm. And so when I discovered marijuana, it was like this hidden treasure trove. It was this thing that just came out of nowhere and was like, where has this been all my life? Yeah. Like, I honestly remember as a 5th grader watching that movie with Dave Chappelle, Half Baked, I think was the name of that movie. And as a 5th grader, like looking at those guys and being like, man, they look like they're having fun. I want to do that. Like, I didn't have a good grasp of what weed was, or and I missed, of course, the whole message of the movie, because even at the end, it's like there are more important things than marijuana. But I quickly glommed onto that idea of like, there's this thing, I don't know much about it, so like, but I'm going to get my hands on it. When I do, it's going to be fun. Yeah. And it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way. I had heard of it, but again, I think for me, and especially now having been a teacher, which we can go into a little more later, like normalizing things at an early age and exposing children to things is important. And I think that I had to don't just say no, we don't do drugs in this house. And I'm not trying to blame my parents. They were doing the best they could. But I would just hope that in today's day and age, especially with something that is now legal in so many places and just on billboards and advertisements, and like that somebody is going to basically say to a kid flat out, like, you might try that stuff someday and you might enjoy it. And so, you know, how then to have that conversation and, you know, about, well, what is going to happen if it goes to that next stage of from enjoyment to like, I kind of need this, or, you know, I'd rather be like this all the time than normal because my normal life as a teenager is really hard.
Yeah.
So
Right.
just some awareness or exposure that goes beyond just the just say no approach.
Yeah. And like, as terms of age, do you think like middle school is a good time to have this conversation, or do you think it should start even
No,
earlier?
it has to start earlier. I mean, I taught elementary school and middle school. I knew fourth graders who already were being exposed to marijuana. I mean, I had a kid who was in fifth grade who was already smoking.
Wow.
Actually, more than one student who was already smoking. And I've met plenty of people who started smoking when they were 11 years old.
Wow.
I think there's this magic age of the 2 digits where all of a sudden you're old enough and you can make big decisions for yourself. And a lot of people have older siblings too. So even if they're not smoking, so many of the students I worked with had older siblings who would smoke in the house around them. They'd be driving them, you know, home from school, smoking in the car. Like, so there was, this substance was just, I mean, and I'd smell it on parents when they would come in to pick up their kids and stuff. So it's not like the kids haven't seen it. And so the idea of like waiting till middle school, that's a setup for me. I mean, they're inevitably going to find it and they're going to try it and they're going to have no awareness of what they're getting themselves into. So,
yeah. It's pretty easy to get. So
yeah, I don't think maybe in the past that would have been the case that you had to have this conversation quite that early, but it's a much different time in terms of how kids are being exposed to things much earlier. So.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's it. And just to build on that, you know, an experience of being a school teacher. You know, before this, we talked a little bit about some of the funny reactions that you got after your documentary came out from students. People like me, and you and I had talked a little bit before this about, you know, my perspectives and some of my professional opinions and personal opinions about marijuana and legalization and all of that. We did get to talk a little bit about policy. What do you think that for people like me, prevention people, what do we need to know, especially from your perspective with working with kids and being a teacher? Like, what are we doing wrong? Like, what do I need to do better? How do we need to deliver these messages?
You know, I mean, that's $1 million question. I think that part of it has to do with I feel like, and I'm guilty of this too, and especially as a teacher, this idea that as adults, we try to give that whole, like, I know what you're feeling, like, I did that too. And like, the reality is, we don't have any clue what kids these days are experiencing in the social media realm, in sort of the problems and like the way that the world is right now. Like, our experience of the world and growing up and being introduced to drugs was incredibly different than theirs. And so I think this sort of approach of, on the one hand, obviously, the just say no and adults tell you what to do and this is bad, don't do it, is clearly not working. And thank goodness that that's not the approach almost by anyone anymore. Maybe within certain households it is, but as a professional, you know, I think that there has to be, I don't know, it's like humility is almost the word that comes to mind in this arena of saying, like, hey, we don't know what you're actually experiencing, how hard your life is. Like, and in some ways, not to enable them, but to like help them recognize that, like, the fact that if you are already have made a choice to use, nobody's trying to like tell you you're a bad person or that you screwed up, you know, that, but really giving them kind of the benefit of the doubt to say, like, it sounds like, you know, things have really led you to this, and like, what kind of support would it take to help you feel like you didn't need this as like the, you know, pillar cornerstone of your life. So I guess just coming back to kind of what I said is, I think that as adults, we oftentimes have this fake idea that we can connect with the kids and the youth and like the reality is they see right through that we just don't. And I am so guilty of that. So that's why I'm able to make that call. I had to kind of finally just become the old man in the classroom that I was. And this is, you know, coming from somebody who's barely over 30, that kids already looked at me as like an old married dude who, you know, clearly didn't know what good music was anymore. And yeah, and not to go too far into it, but my middle schoolers very quickly figured out, they found my documentary. They quickly discovered, and that video went almost immediately viral within my school. So that became a whole discussion in and of itself. And I had to really deal with that and take that head on, to have that conversation, to just say like, yeah, like this is something I chose to do. It's also, recovery is something I chose to do as well. And to like realize that this wasn't making my life better. And some of you are probably making this choice right now. And, you know, I just hope that somebody's there and people are there to support you when you're ready to, you know, go a different direction.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's a weird one. It's so funny because sometimes when I'm in classrooms with people, they'll be like, "Have you ever used drugs?" And like, you know, we get told like sort of how to handle those conversations. And I remember I was giving a presentation once about vaping, and some kid was like just being really rude and just not digging what I was saying at all. And she's like, "You're reading from the slides." I'm like, "Oh my God."
This was middle school, right?
High school.
Okay, well, high school, yes. I was gonna.
Oh,
Middle school,
I know, but
sure
like,
say that, yeah.
still, like, I was always raised, respect the teacher, like, don't be rude. And I'm getting like grilled by these kids, and like, oh, freaked me out.
They're
I
always
think,
looking to tear apart what you say. So I guess,
yeah.
sorry to like, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like
No,
that,
no,
I guess
no.
to sort of go back to your earlier thing, kids are always going to look for what's wrong in what you're saying and to try to prove you wrong. And so I think as an adult, that's where that humility piece gets so important, because the reality is we are going to make a lot of false assumptions about their experiences, why they're choosing to use what, their friends have taught them versus what we're trying to tell them. So it's just like kind of coming into a little more of an open mind than a like, we need to get you to stop using because or else things are going to go downhill real quickly. Like the reality is some people will use normally for the rest of their lives. Like that's the truth. And some of those kids' parents probably do use in a controlled manner and have been for decades. And that's, we don't have the authority to say that that's not the case for them. So.
Yeah. Same with alcohol, people can drink responsibly.
Yep.
For sure. So do you think facts have a place in all this? So do you think we should be talking about science and facts? And, do you think that's still a good thing to bring out there in the community and talking to kids?
I think it's a very valid point. I mean, I think that as somebody who, I love science myself, and even as a, whatever, growing up, despite my pothead demeanor, I was still, it's hard to deny things that are right in your face, like those pictures of brains where you see somebody's, the CG scans of somebody who's been using versus not, like that sticks with you. And as to whether that's going to make the effect on that kid when they're 15, maybe not, but when they're 20, sometimes, we have to be taught something 15 times before we learn it. So in that case, it's good to start early, even though it might kind of, as long as we're not pulling the Charlie Brown teacher, just hitting them with facts and facts and facts. I think that stories absolutely have a place when it comes to helping kids kind of really grasp it. But I think that it is important to, telling them the average age of, people when they start using, like how many people start to actually get addicted to this. Like kids understand percentages, they understand fractions. I just, an example number, this isn't true, but obviously like if 1 out of 4 people that tried marijuana got addicted to it, that might be good for a kid to recognize, like, I have a 25% chance. Like, of course, being individuals, we're always going to assume it's not us. But then if we can at least later refer to that fraction and be like, 25% is kind of high odds for failure in this realm. Like, I think it would be potentially behooving. So I would not say that it needs to, I think it's finding a good balance. I don't envy your position because it's not easy to go, into any classroom, and especially to try to tell teens and kids about, it's like trying to teach them about the birds and the bees. They already know everything about that, right? Like,
sure. Yeah, glad that's not my job, that part. Oh my God. Yeah. So you and I we did get to talk a little bit before this, and I got to hear a little bit about you and your life and what you're up to right now. You're a busy guy. What's next for you? And do you think there'll be a follow-up to your documentary, or what can we expect from you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this year I actually left teaching, just personal reasons, realizing that I'm at an age and stage where if I'm going to make career changes, I need to. I'm actually currently working on 2 books. three. One is a children's book, but then two that I'm more seriously invested in. I'm kind of pursuing a career probably full-time in doing race and equity work, actually. So like diversity and inclusion stuff. Wanting to do trainings and workshops on like implicit bias. That was a lot of the big focus that I was doing in a lot of the classroom stuff. So yeah, one of the books is really doing kind of a deep dive into white privilege. And the other one is actually, believe it or not, helping kids learn and talk about sex more appropriately and healthfully, because I did have to teach that as part of my units, and I collected a lot of information, a lot of kind of, you know, real-time questions and feedback, and it's that book actually has a lot of traction. So I'm hoping that it's looking like potentially within the next year or so that one might actually be getting released to the general public, which would be cool.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. As far as the marijuana stuff, you know, I still do a lot of support and mentorship and coaching with individual people. You know, I help people who reach out to me. I've mentored people for months, years, just really to try to kind of help them see it through. It's still a problem for a lot of people. I've done a lot of service work around spreading, getting information out there, helping with literature, things like that, and different organizations that are kind of geared toward just like helping, you know, people who are addicted and choose to recover, not to, you know, force people, but anybody who chooses. We're there to kind of support them. I've been asked about a follow-up. I'm honestly thinking that at this point, even though I have documentary skills, I could almost see maybe writing something. Now that I've kind of been moving in this direction of books and things, is like it could be interesting to kind of write a follow-up, and then creating some sort of linked, you know, video content to it. But producing a full-blown documentary is a lot of energy and a lot of work.
Yeah.
And, I think I would want to think long and hard about, you know, what the message would be this time around. I think it's a very different environment than it was when I made that. Obviously, weed was still kind of on the fringes of decriminalization and, you know, prescriptions and whatnot, but now it's like there would be a lot more to tackle in terms of just like the prevalence and availability of it.
Right.
But it would be an interesting endeavor. I've given it some thought. I'm not sure where I'm at on that one.
All right. Well, I will look forward to everything that's coming from you in the future. And coalitions like mine, we got to do a lot of cultural competence work. So some of that could probably trickle over to prevention too. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, David. I've really gotten, I've enjoyed getting to know you and hearing about your experience. And, you know, it's super helpful to me in my work and hopefully to my community as well. And, you know, maybe we can do this again sometime, maybe when your book comes out.
I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for having me. It's been
Now the best way to reach you, if anybody watching this is curious to get a hold of you, does Facebook work, or?
Facebook is definitely a way. David Goldenkranz. I'm happy to get out personal information. My email is literally david.goldenkranz@gmail.com.
Terrific.
If you have a hard time spelling that, I'm sure we can put something on here.
Yeah, we can. We definitely can. All right.
Okay.
All right. So thank you so much. Have a great day. And we'll keep in touch.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.